From the National Museum of African American Music in Nashville, Tennessee, this is Just Conversations, presented by the Metro Human Relations Commission.
Welcome to this episode of Just Conversations. Today we are talking about preserving and protecting civil rights and Black histories, and we are coming to you from the National Museum of African American Music here in Nashville. I'm your host, David Ewing of Nashville History on Tour, and we have a great panel today, and we'll start with the introductions, and I'll let King introduce himself starting.
I'm King Hollands. I am a native Nashvilleian and a participant in the Nashville Civil Rights Movement from Fisk University.
Okay, Timothy.
Yes, my name is Timothy Hughes. I'm also a graduate of Fisk University and very proud to be inheriting in many ways the legacy of the work and the struggle of so many folks like King. So it's an honor to be here on the panel with him. I work at the intersection of public policy and social justice with Black Voters Matter.
And I'm Marissa Richmond. Too, I'm a native of Nashville. I'm a member of the Metro Human Relations Commission, and I currently teach history, including African American history, as well as women's and gender studies at Middle Tennessee State University in Murfreesboro.
We have a true rarity today, 4 native Nashvilleians that have spent their lives here and the struggle here. So it's great to have everyone here. I'll start with King. The journey of the civil rights, of course, is long and it's still not over. How did you get your start, and where has the journey taken you, and what do we still need to fix?
Well, I guess I could say I got my start with my family. My mother was a native Oklahomian, and she came to Nashville to go to school, and my father was here as a minister, and when I was growing up, we traveled a good bit around the country. All of my mother's family was west of the Mississippi. My father was from Mississippi, and so I got a good bit of exposure there. Also, in 1954, Brown versus Board of Education, May 17th, the Catholic schools in Nashville decided to integrate, and there were 14 of us in that first class to integrate Father Ryan in Nashville. And of course, the Catholic schools in those days were segregated by sex. Father Ryan was all boys and Cathedral was all girls, and there was a complementary set of girls. I left Father Ryan and went to Fisk and immediately got involved with the Foreign Student Society there, and as a result of some of the pre-planning, got involved with the movement, early parts of the movement at that time, and went to Highlander Folk School with Miles Horton to study civil rights movement activities, and participated in the early movement, and also went to jail in Nashville as a result of marching in the movement here in Nashville.
So we're going to come back to that, but that's very interesting. Highlander, Fisk, going to jail, that's what we read about in the history books, and you lived it. So Timothy, I'm going to ask you the same question about the journey being long for civil rights. Where did you get your start, and where's the journey taken you?
Yeah, I actually was the beneficiary of a Catholic school education in many ways. I think that we learned very early on about the importance of self-sacrifice and of commitment to larger struggle. I grew up in an environment with a mother who was a school teacher and a father who was in law enforcement. My grandmother was very active in the NAACP. And so I had lived examples of the kinds of folks who were committed to struggle and wanted to make a better world for others. Coming to a place like Fisk University to study was also another place that was deeply imbued with a commitment of public service and dedication to others. And so in many ways, the path was laid by the examples of folks like King who came into a community that was fighting, that was struggling, to where voices were being amplified and movement was occurring. And in my generation, in the latter part of the 2000s, there was the Gen 6. There were a number of different activities and movements. And at that time, there was sort of a spark, a desire to get involved in movement and in service. My first job after graduation was at the Nashville Public Library, where I did a lot of research about the struggle of the modern civil rights movement. And it was around that same time that there was a burgeoning movement about Black Lives Matter that was really becoming, really entering its own and coming to fruition. And since that time, I've been very involved at the intersection of public policy and social justice, specifically around the issue of voting rights. So much of what is decided for our communities is determined by individuals in some of these smoke-filled rooms and back alleys, and the decisions that are made that impact our communities have to involve our folks. And the way that we do that is we engage the process of voter enfranchisement and using the ballot as a way of making demands of those who are in positions of power.
Marissa, tell us about your start into activism. How did it start and what you've been up to in the last 10, 20 years?
Well, my parents, they moved to Nashville just only about a month or two before I was born. But they had experienced Jim Crow and other places while working at Florida A&M. Both of my parents were professors. They got active in the Tallahassee Bus Boycott, which was sometimes overshadowed by the bigger, more successful Montgomery bus boycott, but they spoke out and participated in that. And then after moving to Nashville, they got involved in supporting the sit-ins. Now, my mother at the time, she hadn't yet had a job. Fisk, where my dad was working, would not hire married couples, so she finally got a job at TSU down the street, but it took a couple of years. But when the sit-ins started, she was pregnant with my sister, so rather than go out on the front lines and risk her health, she got on the phone, which she was good at doing, and helped organize the business boycotts, saying those kids are down there fighting for us, we need to support them. My dad at Fisk helped make classroom space available for the sit-in trainings when the churches weren't available, because after all, the churches have their own classes and their own programs, so they weren't available 7 days a week. And so they got very active and involved in supporting the movement. And I was raised, in that sort of environment. My parents saying, we have to fight for ourselves. Don't let other people fight your fights for you. We have to stand up for ourselves. And so they were engaged in the process and taught me to be involved as well.
Wonderful. King, tell us about the Highlander Folk School. The Highlander Folk School, the famous training center for social justice down in Monteagle, south of here. Dr. King was trained down there. Rosa Parks was trained down there. John Lewis, Diane, yourself. Tell us how you got involved and kind of what you learned in the whole nonviolent teaching.
Well, first of all, the history of Highlander Folk School is a movement in itself, and they were involved in the movement of keeping of unions in the South, which was an anathema, and so it was a natural move for them. They were out of favor with everyone, and so they started with some training with after the Montgomery bus boycott with Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King. They were both
in. What did you get down there?
And a result of that training was specific to nonviolent methods there, and those of us who were in those classes got extensive training in the nonviolent movement, the philosophy of that, and the approaches. So we took that back to Nashville as a part of the
You took it back to Nashville and you got in your own good trouble. Tell us about you going to our city jail and kind of what caused that.
Sure. The sit-in movement in Nashville, when it became active, most of us, as the movement progressed, we would leave from First Baptist Capitol Hill and march 2 by 2 over to Fifth and Commerce. By the time we hit Fifth and Commerce, as I say to people, it was like walking into a football stadium, a Nissan stadium, I say here, with all the crowds and the noises, because the streets would be lined with people who did not want us there in the active part. And so we would hit that corner and things would open up. Those of us who were trained in the nonviolent movement also knew that the people who said that we cannot participate in that, our character would not allow us to be nonviolent, but they also knew and were trained to not react. So that was a very important part. I always say to people that everyone had a role in the movement.
So you were taken to jail. Why?
One of the was taken to jail as a result of sit-ins at lunch counters on Fifth Avenue, and they loaded us up in what was called the paddy wagons in those days.
How long did you spend in jail?
I spent a couple of weeks in jail.
Until your trial?
Until the trial. Trial occurred with the support of most of the black lawyers in Nashville. Supported us in Z. Alexander Luby.
So Z. Alexander Luby was one of your lawyers.
Was leading the group, and so we had also we had a lot of support from the members and owners of property in Nashville, because they put up the bail bond for us.
Wonderful. Now, Tim, voting has been very important in the civil rights movement in the last 10, 20 years. Tell us how you got involved in that, and kind of what activism looks like today, and how have you learned from what happened literally in our city?
Absolutely. The issue of the franchise and of voting rights is something that has long been a struggle by which individuals are able to, demonstrate their full humanity. We see now in this current iteration that there are efforts being made not only to suppress the vote of individuals who are speaking out and holding accountable individuals who are in elected office, but we find now that there are efforts being made in some ways to criminalize voter registration. One of the organizations that I was deeply involved with prior to my joining with Black Voters Matter was a group here locally called the Equity Alliance, founded by two African-American women, Tequila Johnson and Charlene Oliver. And during one of their initial programs, the Tennessee Black Voter Project, I was one of the leaders on that project, and we registered nearly 100,000 individuals in the state of Tennessee to vote. And then we found later on that there were efforts being made to criminalize mass voter registration as a result of our success. And we find that in this moment, when we should be encouraging every single person who is registered to vote and eligible to vote to engage themselves in the franchise, there are efforts being made by some systems, by some structures, by some political parties and entities to try to suppress those votes. And if we are going to make sure that we're representing the interests and the concerns of our communities and amplifying the needs and the concerns of those members of the community, we need to make sure that every single person who's eligible is not only registered, but engaged in the franchise. And we've got to make sure that we are safeguarding and protecting the right to vote, because it is in fact sacrosanct.
Wonderful. Marissa, 60, 70 years ago when Dr. King started the civil rights movement was about black and white. That has changed now. Tell us how it's changed and what's really the kind of pressing issue that you see of today.
Well, it's evolved, certainly. And as Timothy was just talking about, those issues, especially voting issues, are still important in the Black community. But we've seen it expand for women's rights, for immigrant rights, for the LGBTQ community. All of these groups that have been marginalized, have been oppressed in certain ways, are fighting and are building upon the successes of the civil rights movement. And all of these groups have learned lessons, are sharing from one another. The various caucuses, equality caucuses in Congress, work together and communicate on bills related to, like the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and many others, all committed to fighting for equality of opportunity in the workplace, and to address violence, especially police violence that targets immigrants, especially people of color, immigrants, Latinos, and of course the Black community, which itself has helped spark the more recent Black Lives Matter movement.
Right. Now, getting back to your 2 weeks plus in jail, one of the most kind of infamous days in Nashville history, as you know, was April 19th, 1960 at 5 o'clock in the morning across from Fisk University. Your lawyer, Z. Alexander Luby's house was bombed, and fortunately he and his wife were not in the front of the house, they were in the back of the house. Tell me about that day and how you heard or found out about it and what ensued later on that day.
I was in my dorm room at Du Bois Hall and was awakened by the loud explosion that occurred. And that's at least 2 blocks away, maybe 2.5 blocks. So that gives you an indication of how powerful the bomb was. That woke me up, and of course, others in the building, we were stirred, and we all moved out into the street and discovered as we went down to Meharry Boulevard and saw the destruction that occurred of the house. They were very lucky that the bomb that was thrown missed the window. Did not go through the window, but hit the wall and fell in front of the house on the outside and exploded there. The Lubys were in the back of the house in the bedroom, so they survived.
So tell us what happened the rest of that day.
Mass movement. Fisk, that was directly across the street from Meharry, also half a block from Fisk campus, so that
you all had a
mass of
march.
people. And so as the day went on, marchers came from everywhere. Tennessee State students marched up Jefferson Street to Fisk, and as they marched, people joined in that march, and that march continued down Jefferson Street to the downtown area,
City Hall.
and to City Hall.
So what do you remember about that day and seeing the mayor come out and greet everybody?
Well, it was an astounding day. There was a great mass of people there. Everyone was very upset. It was just a shocking experience.
You had non-violent training.
Yes.
How did that crowd of 4,000 people keep their calm after a bomb had literally gone off in their neighborhood?
Because of that training, I pointed out that everyone in the community felt that they had a role to play. The success of the movement, the planning, our movement had lots of plans, so people knew that if the movement people were involved, and of course it was Diane Nash, John Lewis, C.T. Vivian, all the leaders from American Baptist College and other places, so they led, people knew that they would take things in hand. So that was when Diane approached the mayor and asked him that famous question, do you think that segregation is wrong?
Yeah. Timothy, we're a blue city and a red state. How do you navigate between the city of Nashville, getting what you need, and then the state of Tennessee today?
I think the many challenges that we face in navigating the political space, but also just dealing with the challenges and the issues that we face as a community. I mean, we're in a COVID-19 pandemic in communities that have been traditionally under-resourced and marginalized. The challenges that we face, whether the city be red and the state be blue or vice versa, the challenges that we face are often innumerable. And the issues that we are contending with are the kinds of things that we have to organize around, that we need to center and need to address so that our communities can feel safe, so the community members can feel better resourced and supported. And so groups and organizations, grassroots organizations, coalitions are working together, not only to demand that we protect the right to vote, but also to make sure that we have quality public education in our schools, that we address the needs and the concerns from an environmental perspective. And so our water is not polluted, and the communities that we are seeing that are traditionally under-resourced are provided with sufficient support. The issues that we face are numerous, but as we organize, as we build power, as we collectively come together and try to reflect the better angels of our nature, we can demand accountability no matter who is in office. We can work together to make sure that our communities are safe and that our people are provided for no matter the challenges, because the stakes are extremely high. But we've got to make sure that we are willing to dedicate ourselves to that struggle.
Marissa, I'll ask you the same question about the state, the city, and I'll even throw the federal government in there. How do you navigate all those folks?
Well, that's a challenge, especially because of what the state is doing. The state legislature from banning the teaching of so-called critical race theory. And I teach the college level. I'm not even teaching it at my level. It's only being largely taught at the law school level. And then the slate of hate targeting the LGBTQ community, trying to prevent women from having control of their own bodies. And so, those problems are our problems, and we're seeing all these lawsuits, and Tennessee keeps losing. And so all of us as taxpayers are having to pay for the idiocy of our legislature. At the local level, Metro Nashville, I think, is doing a fairly good job. We could certainly do more. In the Human Relations Commission, we're doing regular trainings with the police department, trying to address the issues of police and community relationships. The federal government, especially since January, has started to reverse some of the hostile policies of the previous administration. And I'm hoping that with the adoption of the new infrastructure bill, that's going to lead to more investment in our communities. HBCUs like Fisk are going to benefit from that. Public transit, education, libraries, all of that, I think it will be a good thing for the entire community, not just Nashville, but across this country.
As we wrap up Just Conversations, I want you to kind of each talk about why you initially got involved and kind of what you would tell the young people today about, kind of the lessons that you learned and what they should be doing today in this city.
Well, initially got involved because of the situation that occurred when I was growing up. Of course, we had not only segregated schools and neighborhoods, but black and white water fountains at the public utilities. Our buses were segregated. Montgomery was not the only place where you had to sit in the back of the bus, and it was evident. My mother was a teacher, and we knew that her salary was a third or less than white teachers. So there were a number of areas that showed us the problem of segregation. I think it's very important that the young people, and as we've seen, that people who experience discrimination has to be active and to carry the banner forward, but also they have to stick together. And all of these movements emerged because women suffrage, Black Lives Matters, LGBT people, but all of the marginalized communities have to plan and support each other and be sure that voting is the most important thing. And we know that's important because that's what people don't want us to do.
Thank you, King. Timothy, why did you get started, and kind of what's the message today to our youth?
As King was speaking, I was reminded of the very poignant words of so many of our great leaders, but one in particular that came to mind was Afeni Shakur, who said it was our duty to fight for our freedom and our duty to win. We must love and support one another. We have nothing to lose but our chains. And I think that the inspiration that I draw often in my work and my organizing is from young people who are out on the front lines, whether they be involved in the environmental struggle for greater justice and equality, demanding accountability from those who are protecting our waterways and making sure that we are able to cope with climate disasters, or if it be with Black Lives Matter, who is demanding accountability for law enforcement. Young people in particular are taking the lead and stepping up. And they have always done that, even during the time of the modern civil rights movement. A lot of that movement was a movement that was largely coordinated by young folks. And so I just want to remind the young people and thank them for their hard work, their dedication and commitment. And we folks who have a little bit of silver in our beard must do what we can to support those burgeoning movements as they're growing and as they're developing, to provide them guidance and support. But we've got to stand together, as King said.
And final words for you, Marissa.
Well, particularly talking to the young people, one of the things that I concern myself with are those young people, the ones in school, the ones growing up who have their whole future ahead of them. And I want to make sure that they enter a world that is equitable, that gives them an opportunity to realize whatever their dreams may be, whether they want to be musicians, as we're in this wonderful space here on John Lewis Way, maybe they want to be ministers or business people, whatever, or in government service. I want to make sure that those young people have an opportunity to realize their dreams and realize their potential. And we have to, I think, collectively need to do everything we can to make sure that they have the tools to succeed and the opportunity to succeed.
Wonderful. What a perfect note to close on. And I would like to thank our panelists, King, Timothy, and Marissa, for participating. Of course, the National Museum of African American Music for hosting us. And thank you for tuning in to Just Conversations on this topic of preserving and protecting civil rights and Black histories. To see other episodes of Just Conversations, please visit www.justconversations.org and find out more and stay active. Thank you.